I also spoke to people who had graduated from Cambridge recently, and some of them which had also studied history, and it was important because this relaxed me, and they told me that the interview was going to challenge me, and you just have to accept that because obviously everyone's at a high standard and they need to see who's good enough. Also read widely because they don't expect state school children to do this, so they might not expect you to necessarily come across certain books which grammar school children may have done, so that reflects well on you. I'd also come up with examples of things you've read or something you've mentioned in your personal statement. Also read over any essays or your personal statement and stuff you've sent in because they will be discussed in your interview.
They'll ask the people who are doing it, well, I got told who they were, and they will ask you what they specialise in. So the person I had was a specialist in bird migration, and that's what he asked me on. So do a bit of research before you get there about them and what they specialise in.
On the day, I had 2 interviews, and the first one they were really friendly. They discussed what would happen and how it would pan out, and they asked the obvious question, why history, which I had sort of prepared for but not learnt an answer. They read over my personal statement and picked up things they were going to ask me on. At one point I couldn't answer a question, but the lady was really nice. She just moved on to another question about my EPQ and asked about whether Japanese culture or not being of the Japanese culture affects how you learn about that society, whether it's a kind of a barrier. I was given a source and it was a Greek memorial, and I had to ask questions to them about it, so just the source of it, where was it used, what does it show and who is it for and things like that. Before my second interview I had some reading time, and I had a chapter on the Norman Conquest, and it was something I'd never come across before, but attached to the sheet was some questions that's kind of relaxed you because they asked you things to think about while you're reading it, and they said, don't worry, we know you haven't come across this, but we expect that you haven't. So when I got into the interview, they approached that and asked things about the chapter and what areas would historians find sensitive to write about, and I kind of struggled on that because you had to look at the most important points of the essay, but where I'd kind of rushed to read it because I thought I wasn't going to get it, I kind of missed that out. But they just move on and they don't make a big deal of it, and if you don't get a certain thing, they kind of guide you. You don't feel under pressure in that sense.
I went along to my interview, and the first one was in the morning, and I sat down with 2 of the doctors and they went through one poem with me. So they'd had me sit outside first and I'd read the poem and then come in, and one of them questioned me about it and what I thought about it, and you have to back up everything you're saying with like references to the text that you've read. And then the other interviewer talked about books I'd read on the syllabus at school, so be prepared to be asked about that. You have to know your stuff.
I had to get there at 9:30, and we had a meeting, but I basically got the day to myself. I had 2 interviews on 2 days, and I had the day to myself to prepare for it and do work and stuff. Then I had an interview at 6:30 in a room with 2 people, and they're really friendly. It's more like a conversation than an interview, I found. It wasn't daunting. It was daunting, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be in any way. When I got in there, the first thing they asked was about my personal statement. I assume that was to make it easier for me and get me relaxed. It was they asked me about an olm, the amphibian, and that was in my statement. Then they gave me a skull of a bird, and I had to say how it's adapted to its environment, so it was a diving bird, so I had to, it was about the bone structure, and the eyes were facing forward to give it a better vision. They gave me a graph of plant species in Madagascar, and I had to say I had to say how they'd changed over time on the island and suggest reasons for that, and then they'd come back with different things to my answers to say different things.
In the second interview, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I thought maybe it would be more based on my personal statement, but actually I was given another poem to read and a big extract from a book, and I had to talk through that with one interviewer, and then the second one again talked about some of the books I'd read at school. And before I'd gone to the interview, I tried to question spot. I thought, oh, they might ask me this about this book, they might ask me this, and actually I wasn't asked anything I thought I'd be, so I don't advise you to question spot at all, because it probably won't come up.
First you had to register, take you to the register place, then they just weren't there, so you had to go to another place, which I didn't really know where it was, but found it eventually. And then I had my test early, and then 2 interviews after that, but we had like an hour break between them, so I got some lunch. Just relax.
I was also asked how it would be different, how I would find studying degree different from A-level, which was kind of an easy question because there's obvious differences. And they asked about my role as an ambassador at school, which I didn't really expect because I thought it would be based on the subject, but I knew kind of what to say. They also had my essays, which they asked about. Some questions were really difficult because it was looking at an angle which I'd never approached before. For example, I had an essay about the atomic bomb, but they asked about the British Empire, and although it was a link, it was something I'd never explored before, but obviously they guide you to an answer.
On the other interview, that was the next day, so I stayed overnight, and in that one that was a lot more difficult because they asked about the Loch Ness Monster, why couldn't it possibly exist, which is quite a question that stung me a little bit. And the answers were things like it has to have at least 30 of them to maintain the population. And the next one was I got a worm encased in some glass, and I had to say how that was adapted to surviving inside humans, and they sort of fire back things at you whatever you say. And I thought I found that quite interesting. If I'd offer you any advice, it's don't worry much about it because the people are friendly and they're just the same as anyone else. They're not like.
If you're applying to do engineering, you need to read ahead in the book. You need to learn nearly all of maths for the next year. Definitely do further maths. You need that. And physics. The physics wasn't too bad. Seemed to know all the physics. Apart from that, you should be all right.
Overall, I think if you're going to apply to Oxbridge, you have to really want it. It's an all or nothing thing, really. And also, if you don't think you're going to work for it, then don't bother, because it is a lot more extra work than just a normal university application, because there's loads of extra forms to fill in, you know, additional personal statements to write. But I think if you have even a small chance of getting in, then go for it, because you really don't have anything to lose.
Overall, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't tough, but it does put to the test how much you want it. But I do think the stress was worth it in the end.
The overall experience, mine was pretty horrendous actually, because in the morning me and my mum had missed the train, so we had to pay £80 to get a taxi up to Cambridge, and the taxi driver got lost in Cambridge, so we had to get out and run across to the college. We didn't know where it was, we were asking all strangers and everything, and we got there with a minute to spare, and so I ran in, went up the stairs to my interview room, and as I got there a girl came out sobbing, and so that really frightened me then, and then I was all flustered. I went in and I didn't know what was happening, and yeah, I was very flustered. It wasn't a great experience. Then I had the 2 interviews and the exam, which I found very, very challenging. They weren't scary as such, it was just very hard. And then on the way home, we missed the train again, and my mum lost all of her Christmas shopping in the taxi. And so really it was just a tiring, draining day, and I'd advise you not to rely on public transport like we did. I'd advise you to go stay in a hotel or perhaps drive up there, just so that you have a nice, calm experience and you're not panicked like I was before going into the interview.
It's a good experience. It's just an interview really, and talking. It's good to see other people that are applying there as well, what they're like. It's alright, really.
Overall, I think it's a really good experience and I really enjoyed it. And that's it, really.